All right. Hi, everybody. Huge thank you to Subaru for helping us to make all of this happen. And while folks are getting on, we're just going to give them a minute or two. I know I'm so excited about this particular presentation. You know, all of us have been taking so many photos. I think especially in lockdown, I've been taking even more photos of my pets, and I can't wait to learn about how to make them a little bit better. So we're just thrilled to welcome Mark Rogers to this as our expert on this. Mark, if you are not familiar with him, is just an amazing and incredibly sought after pet photographer in the Bay Area. He's done a bunch of the photos of pets that you'll see in Pet Food Express and commercial and private clients, and it's just incredible. So we are thrilled to welcome him. We are just thrilled again, and that one more thank you to Subaru for supporting this whole day. And Berkeley Humane is a nonprofit adoption center and training place and low cost spay and neuter. So we've done all of these for you guys for free today. But if you enjoy it, you can consider going ahead and making a donation at berkeleyhumane.org. So without any more ado, I would love to introduce Mark Rogers.
Well, thank you, Morgan. I appreciate it. You all are going to have to bear with me because this is my first Zoom presentation, and I can already tell you that both of my dogs are barking in the background at something. So this is going to get very interesting very fast. Morgan, just because I can't tell, can you confirm for me that everybody that you're seeing the proper thing on the screen?
We are seeing it.
Great.
We're seeing your logo perfectly.
Great. So I'll yammer on for a few minutes before I start going through these. I put a very, very basic presentation together just to sort of exemplify a few of the things I'm going to be talking about. But I thought I would just share a little bit about myself and how I ended up in this wacky job, which I love. And as Morgan said, I do a lot of work with rescue groups and shelters around the Bay Area, and that's kind of how I got started in this. When I came to the Bay Area about 20 years ago, I had another kind of job. I was working for a tech company, and several years into that out here, I decided that I like photographing animals a lot more than sitting behind a computer screen at a desk all day, and started seeing how I could turn that into a full-time job. And for the last 15 years, that's what I've been doing. So it's officially my second career, but it is at this point the longest I've ever worked at any one thing in my life. So it is. I'm really happy that I figured that out before I got too far into my old age. But it's what I love to do, hanging out with animals and looking like a strange middle-aged man crawling around in the mud and the grass, and making weird animal sounds in front of crowds is quite a way to go through your day. But I really wouldn't have it any other way at this point. I know a lot of folks are probably using their phones these days as their camera, which is great because the cameras are getting better and better and better. There certainly are some things you cannot do on a phone camera that you can do with a good DSLR, but a lot of the basic principles I'm going to talk about today, I'm not going to get overly complicated, apply to whatever camera you happen to be using. If you are a DSLR hobbyist, or even a little bit further along, there is you can get a little bit more sophisticated with what you do, but the new cameras in the phones are just beyond excellent, especially compared to when I've been doing this 15 years, which is right about when the first iPhone came out, and the cameras have improved quantumly since then. So there's quite a bit you can do. I do not have any formal photography training. I learned it all along the way, and from a very patient grandfather when I was younger, who taught me how to use a camera, what the basics were. But a lot of photography, especially with pet photography, tends to be trial and error, and learning from your mistakes, and taking lots of images and figuring out afterwards kind of what you did to get that particular image. So if you're already out there shooting a lot with your phone and photographing your own animals or other people's animals, you've started out correctly, and you just sort of need to refine that to do what you do. And then I'll give you some basic stuff today that perhaps will enhance that ability and teach you some more things. Um, I will let me get started with this. So when I first started, I immediately was drawn to animal photography, and I knew some photographers at the time. They all told me I was completely nuts, because animals don't do what you tell them to do, and you're just never going to get them to sit still and pose and get what you need. But I got so much joy out of it just because of the spontaneity and sort of unexpected things that dogs and cats did when I was photographing them that I couldn't imagine just focusing on people. You know, when I started out, I did everything like most new photographers do. So I did weddings and family portraits, and I always ended up coming back to dogs and cats because they were the most fun, and they didn't yell at you like you got yelled at a wedding when things didn't go the way you wanted it. Um, so if you're into randomness and chaos and crazy looks, and you don't mind getting on the ground, then animal and pet photography is for you, as it is for me. Um, just some examples of kind of the kind of work I do. I do a mix of animal portraiture for private clients as well as commercial work. So some of my stuff appears in print ads, other stuff appears in books, but it also ends up on people's walls, on people's of their own animals. So I try to do a range of things to keep me flexible. And I love working with private clients and their own, regular dogs and cats, who don't necessarily know how to be on a in a studio, or in a more planned environment. I kind of love the randomness and the spontaneity of real pets and animals. And just a personal note, upper right side, that is my cat. That is the infamous Jimmy Choo, back when he was in his toilet paper sculpture stage. And he has since moved on to other media, but that was when he was in his prime. Um, just to give you a sense for where I spend most of my time, it really is on the ground. I go through more genes every year now than I ever did when I was a kid. Just because as I get to the more meat and potatoes of this and start talking about what the basics are, you kind of need to be down at animal level to get the best images, I think. Taking them from up above and looking down at them um, tends to not give you the best results. And I personally think that animals react a lot differently when you work with them down at their level. When I work with dogs and cats, usually by the end of a session, I think they start to think of me as another dog or cat, which is how I'm able to get some of the expressions and reactions out of them. Plus, it's fun to crawl around in the dirt and have people stare at you. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten up from a shoot and had a crowd standing around me, wondering what on earth this guy is doing. Because I will also make noises. I'll bark, I'll meow, I'll make goat noises, all sorts of clicking and weird audible ticks, just to get dogs and cats' attention. And it generally brings people over to see what on earth is going on. Um, So I've got all these sort of tips and tricks broken out into a few areas. These first four, I've talked about some of them already, but I'll go over them again. The first thing is to keep your sessions with animals really positive, and it's hard to not think of your of animals you're working with as other people sometimes, especially if you live with them, but they don't really understand what's going on, which may seem obvious, but you kind of have to be very, very patient with them and not expect them to get it like another person would. So I tend to go pretty slowly at first. I use a lot of positive reinforcement. So if they've never seen a camera with a big lens before or ever had an iPhone in their face, I give them treats. I'll show them the camera or put a treat on it and pass it over to them so that they get used to it before I start, firing away. As I was mentioning before, getting down at animal level really helps. I've discovered there's nothing more intimidating than a giant 5.5 or 6 foot person standing over a tiny dog or cat and expecting them to perform. I think bringing it down to them really takes away a lot of the stress for them. I use a lot of treats. To bait dogs and cats. You learn a lot about treat placement as you go, but I'll put it like right on top of the camera to get their eyes looking straight at the camera as opposed to like high up in the air above the camera. And you kind of figure that stuff out as you go, but you can experiment with moving the food a few degrees over to the left or the right or below the camera, or even having somebody behind you holding it, as long as you're able to get the eyes looking right at your screen. Um, some dogs and cats don't react well to treats. They're not treat motivated. So, like I was saying earlier, making noises can definitely help. There's actually some pretty handy apps for phones. There's one called Animal Sounds that's available in the App Store that makes where you get dogs barking or whining and cats meowing, and they also have squeaker sounds. So I use anything and everything to get attention. You need to experiment with it a little bit per animal, because it can be a little scary sometimes. But don't be afraid to make an idiot out of yourself when you're doing this, because it's meant to be fun. And um, once you start getting images from it, it's kind of becomes addictive, and you quickly lose any sense of decorum when you figure out something that works. The other tip I tell everybody who asks me about what it takes to be a pet photographer or a photographer in general is, you have to shoot a lot. You have to take a lot of images, but just because you take a lot of images doesn't mean you want to show everybody every image you've ever taken. Especially if you've got 50 from the same sequence. The best trick you can use is to edit yourself and limit the number of images you show other people, because people get fairly tired fairly fast when you show them the same thing more than once. Um, Move on to some other ones. This is also really important, and it seems obvious, but there's always more than one direction to take shot from. There's multiple angles you can always take. You can take each image from. So a lot of my shots tends to focus on eyes and animals looking into the camera, and I think that works really well. But you can do it from straight ahead. You can do it from above. Although, like I was saying before, you don't want to hang out above an animal too long because it can be intimidating. There's also directly below. This cat in the middle here is actually up on a shelf looking down at me. Um, and then there's other angles like this one on the right, the dog on its back with me facing the dog that way. Um, Experiment with it. Sometimes the camera doesn't even need to always be at a flat angle. You can cant it or angle the camera up just to add some sort of dynamic to the shot. But don't be afraid to vary the way you approach a shot. And these days it's just electrons. You can take as many shots as you need to get it right. Um, the other big one is shooting with backgrounds that aren't too cluttered with stuff. That can be a little hard inside these days. We all live in tiny little apartments and homes in the Bay Area, so it can be hard to find a space where there isn't a bookshelf or something in the way. But the other thing with these phone cameras these days is a lot of them have portrait mode, and that lets you blur out the background. But it's pretty important to focus on the subjects and have the background not be distracting to you. Here's two examples of outdoor shots where that's the case. And the other piece of it is if you have the capacity to or the ability to pick a background color that contrasts with the animal you're photographing, so it sets them off a bit. That really helps too, especially when you're dealing with black and white dogs like the ones here. I'll get to this a little bit further into the presentation, but black and white dogs can be pretty difficult to photograph, and unless you're really experienced, you don't want to be photographing a black dog against a black background or a white dog against a white or really light background. It just makes it really hard to see them. And grass for outdoor shots is great for contrast because there's not too many green dogs around, and most dogs are colored in such a way that grass really makes them pop against it. It's a nice neutral, a nice primary color that makes dogs look really good. So fortunately, especially just after the rainy season, we have a lot of high contrast grass for you to photograph against in the Bay Area. As I was saying, lighting. This is probably the thing that takes the longest to get a feel for as a photographer, but after a while you start becoming attuned to it. I'll talk a little bit more about black and white dogs in a bit, but the main things I can tell you, especially if you're shooting outdoors, are time of day is really important. Most people think the more light there is, the better. That's not necessarily the case. The last time in the world you want to be outside shooting pets is midday at noon. It's the worst light of the day. The sun's directly overhead. The light's really hard and harsh. And when you're outdoors, you either want to be shooting in sort of open shade where it's nice, even light, or you want to be shooting at the very beginning of the day or towards the end of the day when the angle of the light's nice and low and you don't have those harsh shadows. It's a lot more forgiving. And that's particularly the case with white and black dogs. White dogs reflect a lot of light, black dogs absorb it. And I'm sure you've all seen or experienced trying to photograph a white animal or a black animal at midday. It just doesn't work very well. So bringing them into the shadows, nice even shadows without a lot of dappled light helps. Or like the shot on the left of the white dog that was taken at first light, so there's not a whole lot of direct sun yet. It's lighting up the sky in the background and the bridge, but not the area where I'm photographing the dog. The other great thing about the Bay Area is fog and overcast skies. So this dog on the right, that was taken midday, but it was on a very foggy day at Crissy Field. And fog is great because it's nice, even diffused light. And for that shot, I wasn't even using any strobe or flash or anything. That's all natural light. So take advantage of Carl the Fog when you can here. The other thing I can tell you is photographing, if you're having a hard time getting away from the sun and the sun's really bright, excuse me, dogs are barking again, finding a large neutral colored wall, like on the side of a building, where the light is bouncing off of it can really help. If you've stood next to one, you probably noticed that it casts a nice even light on the things that are in front of it. So figuring out a place to shoot where that is the case, where you're there at the time of the day where sun is hitting a wall like that and casting light off of it. If you place your subjects in that bounced light area, they'll be really evenly and prettily lit. So I tell people to do that quite a bit. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Focusing on the eyes. The mistake I see a lot of people make is sort of holding their hands too high when they're trying to get the dog or the cat to look at them. The the key in my view, my view is to have the animal looking at the camera, like I was saying earlier. Or, in some cases, you specifically don't want that. You want a little bit of variety. So, for this one with the cat, I literally had a cat treat sitting on top of my lens, and the cat knew it. For this one on the right, um, I had some help. I had somebody standing behind me to the left, making waving motion to get the hound on the left to look at them, and then I was holding a treat up to the right to get that other hound to look up. But so you can pretty much direct a dog or a cat to look any direction you want. You just have to have some intention behind it. And if you do have somebody helping you, it's important that they be at your camera level. If you have um, a family member, or if you've drafted an assistant to help you out, just make sure they're not standing way above you. Otherwise, anything they're trying to get the attention of will be looking up at them and away from you and away from the camera. Um, as I was just talking about, having assistants. Sometimes for safety purposes, it's really important. I work a lot with puppies and smaller animals, and one thing that really helps with dog and cat photography in particular is elevating them, because they have less places to go and run away from you when you're pointing the camera at them. But it can get a little wonky sometimes, like this little puppy up on a high table. So you want to have somebody there holding them in a place where the camera can't see them, or at least standing by so they don't, fall and hurt themselves. Um, and as you'll see on the right, I've worked a lot with canine units, and getting their attention sometimes takes more than one person. So here I have the dog's handler plus another officer, you know, holding a toy and making noise to get the dog's attention. Usually you don't need that many people, but in this case we did, just to get the dog to look the right way. But that's kind of what I meant by crouching down at camera level, and having an assistant help you out rather than standing up way too high above you. Um, Another key thing is, dogs are not people, and their attention spans are not very long. So I recommend going in shorter bursts with them, especially if you're dealing with much older dogs or really young dogs. They simply just run out of energy and interest if you spend too much time at it. So, like this dog on the left is a 14-year-old Chinese crested. Dog on the right is obviously a puppy. And I worked with each of them for about 10 minutes at a time. Then we took breaks, and I either worked with another dog while they rested, or we just hung out for a little bit and didn't have the camera out. And it's amazing, what giving them a rest and coming back to it will do for both of you, because you can both end up getting a little frustrated. And what the last thing in the world you want with a pet photography photo shoot is your subject getting frustrated, or you, because as most of you know, dogs know that you're frustrated before you do, and they'll pick up on it, and you'll get really unhappy looking subjects. Another seemingly obvious piece of advice, but one that I can lose track of sometimes is, a lot of this is just waiting for something to happen. You don't always know what it's going to be with animals. Um, they can surprise you, and often do every single shoot. But waiting for that moment and taking lots of shots and just sort of being there when it happens, and then editing it afterwards is kind of the key to getting good shots. And these are all sort of examples of that, where the cat on the left, I had no idea it was going to climb up on that shelf. I'd noticed the mask in that house when I got there and thought it was really cool, but I knew that putting a cat on a shelf was basically telling the cat to not go there, because I wanted them to. But when he popped up there, I took advantage of it. Dog in the middle, I took scores of shots that day of the dog, and a gust of wind happened to come up at the right moment, and I got it. But only because I took lots of shots and just happened to be there for it, and didn't stop before the moment came. Same with the one on the right. They, these guys have known each other a long time, and just decided to do this while I was photographing them. I didn't ask them to do it. They kind of just dropped into this moment. And if I hadn't been ready for it, I would have missed it. So you really don't want to be kicking yourself afterwards saying, gosh, I really wish I'd had the camera out. So if in doubt, keep shooting. Um, and this is my parting bit of advice, is be prepared to make a lot of mistakes, because that's where you learn the most. And you know, some of my favorite images are from times when I did something by accident and just happened to be there to catch it. These are some examples of that. I'll start on the right. That black dog running through water. So one of the first pictures I ever took. I had just gotten a digital camera and was sort of figuring out how to make it work, and went to the beach and had no idea how to set, the shutter speed, and had it on way too slow and took this shot. And when I looked at it later, I was like, oh, it's actually kind of cool. So now I actually take these kinds of shots on purpose. Uh, One in the middle, I was holding the camera vertically instead of horizontally. That was not my intent. And I took this shot when somebody stepped on something behind me and the dog jumped up in surprise, and I just happened to get it. It was an accident. And now I take a mix of shots, both vertically and horizontally, even if I don't have to. And then the one on the left of this cat, was never expecting this cat to take a step like this. But I was I was working with a trainer on this one, with a trained cat, and told the trainer to do something, and the cat misconstrued it and took this accidental step, and I happened to be there for it. Um, I don't know how I'm actually going to repeat that mistake if I ever do, but I log that under useful mistakes that ended up working out for me. And that's kind of the end of the formal presentation. I had told Morgan that I'm happy to take questions from anybody that has any specific questions about, photography in general, and what on earth to do with your phone in certain situations. So I'm happy to do that now, or go back and dig in a little deeper on some of these if I didn't go deeply enough for people. So Morgan, I'll field questions if this is a good time for it.
Great, Mark. So thank you so much. And I love that trip through your work. And again, if folks want to ask any questions, you can use the Q&A box that's on your bottom menu. But right now, I think I would love to know if there are, if any of these photos that you've taken are ones that have special meaning for you. And I think, you talked about that one on the right that was one of the first photos that you took, but if any of the other ones in this presentation were really special when it came to where they were or who you were shooting or anything like that.
Oh, well, I love all my images. Let's see. I'd have to say, there's a few. Let me go back to. So this one, this cat on the left, is named Gizmo, and I took this. Gizmo's parents gave a donation to a cat rescue, so I took this image for one of those Pet Food Express My Mutt posters. And it was the first time I'd ever met an Abyssinian cat. I had heard about them, but I'd never met one in person, and have become infatuated with them ever since, just because of how outgoing they are. This look is very typical for an Abyssinian. They are very bold and tend to not be frightened by anything. And I've worked with Gizmo multiple times since then, and a few other Abyssinians, and they're kind of my go-to cat now for types of shoots where I can't have a scaredy cat. I have to have a cat that's going to be immediately curious about whatever is going on and is going to get in my face. So that I always think about Gizmo when I photograph cats for things like that. And I'd say the other one I love is this one, which this cat in the middle. His name is Guido. And that shot I also took very early on. That was taken the first year I started doing this, and it was another completely accidental shot. I, you know, I had been introduced to Guido's mother, who had been introduced to me as a somebody who had a cat and a blog about the cat. And at the time, people didn't, not many people had blogs, much less blogs about cats. And I met this cat, and he had such an outgoing personality. And when I showed up at her place, you know, he went to this shelving area around the top of her kitchen and lay there looking down at me like this, and I just kind of automatically picked up my camera and pointed up at him. And to this day, people always ask me about this picture, like, where is he, what, some people think there's two cats in it because there's this weird pair of legs showing up off the side. But it was just one of those moments that you never forget. And this, I get asked about this image a lot because I've it's ended up on greeting cards and in magazines and in other places just because people have been so drawn to it, and just because the cat's so engaged and obviously unafraid of me and the camera. Just seeing that kind of connection really makes me happy, because that's why I do this. I always get a bit of a buzz, when I come away from a session where I've really made that kind of connection with a dog or a cat. It's really it's kind of addictive, because I will work with animals whose parents will say they're kind of scared, they don't really like to interact with people, and there are times where right away they take to it, and you can sort of see the star quality right away. That's always really exciting to me.
Nice.
I
And so,
see some questions.
yeah, and the next question that I'd love to get in front of you is for multiple animals. So do you have any tips for photographing multiple dogs? I'll also add multiple cats in the same shot.
I work my way up to it usually. Um, I'll if they're in the same household, I'll work with one at a time, and usually what will happen is the other one will become interested or less afraid and get more engaged. Or it's as typical, I'll show up and be told, one dog's very fearful and one is very outgoing, and for whatever reason, call it chemistry or whatnot, the one that's fearful loves it, and the one that's typically not fearful doesn't. So I'll end up working more with the one that was supposed to be scared in the first place. But usually after I work with them individually, they tend to start interacting normally. It gets a little trickier if you're trying to get them both to pose together, and sit next to each other and not look nervous and miserable. But usually with a little bit of treats and encouragement, you're able to get it to happen. You just have to be really patient and not try to force them to do it. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of anthropomorphizing animals and assuming they're going to act just like people. And they just operate at a different level, and you can't always force them to do what you want them to do, and sort of have to take what you can get. And oftentimes that ends up being better than what you had planned in the first place. So my expectations tend to be fairly flexible when it comes to these shoots, especially when there's more than one animal.
Nice. And so we have a couple of questions about animals that are fearful of the camera or not looking away, or look away as soon as they see the camera. And so how do you get the animal to engage with the camera if they're not interested in that in the beginning?
Um, the answer is, it sort of goes back to that very first tip I had given, which is, go really slow, and don't jump right into it. If you get the sense that a dog or a cat is a little bit wary, spend some time interacting and playing with them a bit first. The first thing that you do to them shouldn't be to hold up a phone in their face. That tends to put them off. And don't be afraid to get your phone smelly. Put a treat on it. Let them sniff it. Um, Hold up the phone at them, and if they don't, and be happy about it, and then give them a treat. Do a little. You can do it. I call it behavior modification on the fly. But yeah, I make the whole experience pretty positive, so that they start associating the the camera with food and fun, rather than, something that's intimidating. And it doesn't always work. Especially with cats, there are times where I have to come back a second or third time, and I spend most of the first time just sort of hanging out with them and not taking pictures. It takes them some time to get used to me. Um, so multiple attempts are sometimes required. Other times they simply don't ever get comfortable with it. I work with a lot of rescue animals, especially dogs, and I've had it happen a couple of times where they are just terrified of a lens, especially a long lens, and sometimes they don't like the sound that a shutter, even an electronic shutter, makes, or they don't like the iris on the lens blades opening and closing. They react to it because they're sensory beings, and they don't know what it is. So sometimes you can't get them to look straight at it, and you have to take advantage of that, and you end up with profile pictures, or pictures where the cat or the dog isn't looking directly at you. You can't always force it to happen.
Great. And, just as a quick plug for more stuff on positive behavior modification, we are doing Ask a Trainer at 6 p.m. today. Um, so another question that's happened that we've got a couple of times is about inside versus outside. And do you like that more? And then I'd also add kind of what are the pros and cons of indoor versus outdoor shoots?
Sure. Um, with a phone camera, you have a little less flexibility, because I tend to use a lot of I do use added light, and that's something I've learned to do over the years. It's a little hard to do it with a phone camera, although they believe it or not, they're starting to put out lights you can use with phones. Some of the strobe companies are, but that is probably getting into a little bit more of a complicated area than we have here. Uh, with dogs, I tend to prefer shooting outside. With cats, I tend to prefer shooting inside, mostly because, at least in the Bay Area, most cats I know are predominantly indoor cats, especially if you have uh, if you have a lot of coyotes in the area. Um, Indoors, you can have a little bit more control over the light, because you don't have to worry about shooting at midday, and having the sun blazing overhead and not putting out very good light. Um, Indoors, you also tend to have white walls, which can help bounce that light, like I was talking about earlier. So you can put your subject opposite a white wall when the sun's hitting it, and get nice even light on them. Shooting in doorways is also, there's really good light that comes through doors. It's kind of focused and broad, and you'll see a lot of shots in catalogs with models sort of standing in doorways and halls immediately adjacent to a door, and that's for a reason. The quality of light that comes through a doorway is always pretty nice. Gauzy curtains, especially if they're white or just barely off white, can help diffuse light too. Or if you don't have a gauzy curtain, a white sheet hanging over like a sliding door or a big window, that can make really nice diffuse even light. And if you have a subject in front of that, it's really beautiful looking. And not everybody needs to see the sheet hanging over the window. They just need to see the light resulting from it. Um, did that answer that question? Did I answer all of those?
Yeah, I thought that was great. And then sort of related to this, another question is, how do you get a solid black or any color background without a studio?
Let's see. Um, you're going to want a doorway. A doorway is a good place to start, just especially like in a hallway, where the light is it's hitting the first few feet through the doorway, but then the light falls off really fast. And if you don't have the lights on in the hall behind it, it gets really dark really fast, and your camera's going to sort of pick up the light in the foreground and not the background. You can also, opposite of hanging a white sheet, you can hang a really dark or navy blue blanket, not with a pattern on it or anything, but something really super dark, pretty far back in your background away from your light source. And that'll darken up pretty fast for you. Most people don't know this, but on your phones, you can control the exposure a little bit, or where the exposure is taken, by putting your finger on the surface of the phone on the subject that you want to photograph. So I use this a lot on my iPhone, and I have a fairly old iPhone and it still works. Um, but if you're holding your phone up and you've got a, a dog in the foreground, but it's kind of the way exposure works on phones is they kind of look at everything. There's a computer thinking in the background, and it sort of averages out the light for everything that it sees. Um, some cases that works pretty well. Other cases it gets confused and doesn't expose properly. But you can get it to specify the area it's exposing. So in this case, say you've got a dog in a room. Excuse me again. You've got a dog in a room, and they're all sort of the same tone, and you can't really tell one from the other. If you want to expose the dog a little bit more brightly than the rest of the room, you just put your finger on the dog on your phone, and it'll expose around that dog and lighten up everything else. And that works pretty well, especially with black dogs and white dogs in backgrounds where you don't have a lot of contrast. It's gonna, now the caveat is it's gonna blast out that background, so you won't have any definition to it, especially for a black dog. It'll blast everything out in the background to white or really washed out, but that's still a pretty cool look. Um, and it'll focus your eye on the dog. And
Great.
I see gadgets that help if you only have an iPhone. I mentioned there's a couple of there's a company called Profoto. This is going to be a little expensive for most folks, but they do put out a light specifically for iPhones. It has an app with it, and it's just a little handheld dome light that you can hold in front of an animal and add a little bit of extra light to. But I don't think you really need it. The thing that I find works best is, like I was saying earlier, a white wall, or you can buy a little reflector, um, uh, that, or even a piece of foam core that's white, and you can hold that and bounce light from a window onto your subject. That's, I use foam core a lot, and it's great. It's really cheap. And if you drop it and break it or step on it, it costs you 30 cents to replace it. And that can help you bounce light a lot. And like everything else with photography, it's just experimenting and figuring out, cool ways to do things. Linda, have you encountered a situation where you've been shooting and a predator? Oh boy. Um, No, but I've had the reverse, where instead of a predator approaching the shoot, I've had uh, a dog catch a squirrel in the middle of a shoot, which I don't recommend anybody experiencing. That wasn't much fun. I've never had a coyote interrupt a shoot, although it's something I think about a lot now, especially in San Francisco, that the coyotes have taken over certain areas. But no, I haven't. But it's something I think about when I'm picking locations and times of day when I shoot. And if I am dealing with small dogs, or a vulnerable dog, or an older dog, I'm going to want to pick a spot where I know there's not coyotes or other animals that might show up. Or if I find out a dog doesn't react well to other dogs, I'll pick locations where I know that isn't likely to happen. So I wouldn't go to a dog park, or a place, or a public park where I know people are going to show up with dogs, or a beach. I'd find some place that's more secluded, like a fenced-in backyard, or a place that's less frequented by people with dogs.
All right, so I think those were all of the questions that folks had submitted. So, um, thank you so much, Mark. I know I learned a ton on this today, and I just, we're so grateful to you for spending time with us today. And I think everybody's going to take some slightly better photos of their dogs and their cats and their other pets, thanks to it.
Sure. And I, of course, put this presentation together without including my email address. Are you sending out anything to participants? But if anybody wants to reach out and ask me any more specific questions, my email box and my phone are always available. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We will send out your email address along with to the attendees of this one.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for having me. It's a little weird doing this without getting any immediate feedback and seeing people's faces. So I hope it was coherent and it answered some of your questions. But there's always more to learn when it comes to photography. But the good news is everybody has the tools now to be able to go out and do a pretty good job of it.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you again so much.
Sure.
And so this is going to conclude this webinar. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining.